Hi there, I'm John McAdams, founder of the Big Game Hunting blog. And in this video, I'm going to do a detailed comparison of the 450 Bushmaster and the 4570 government cartridges. Now, both the 450 Bushmaster and the 4570 are fairly popular 45 caliber centerfire rifle cartridges these days. Now, while they are indeed very popular and effective cartridges for many hunting situations, it is pretty easy to overlook some very important details about their performance and best uses. In fact, despite their big differences in external appearance, they are very similar in performance on paper. Even so, there are some major differences to keep in mind, and each is better suited to different hunting tasks and hunting styles. So in this episode, I'm going to investigate these two cartridges in detail and provide some insight into which cartridge is better suited for some common hunting situations, so you can make a more informed decision on which one will work best for you. Now, before we get started, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click that red subscribe button below so you don't miss out on any of my new videos about hunting gear reviews, cartridge comparisons, and more. Now, for more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they are best suited for, click the link in the description below or go to huntingguns101.com to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. So first, we'll talk a little bit about the history of the 4570 and the 450 Bushmaster. The American Civil War and the years immediately following the conflict saw a surge in the development of new breech-loading rifles and cartridges using metallic cases for both civilian and military use in the United States. With this in mind, the U.S. Army began the search for a new cartridge and breech-loading rifle to replace the muzzle-loading rifles and paper cartridges most American soldiers still primarily used at the time. Now, the Army temporarily adopted the 5070 government cartridge and the single-shot Springfield Model 1866 breech-loading rifle as a short-lived improvement over the more primitive muzzle-loading rifles used during the Civil War. They chose an even more improved rifle cartridge combination as a replacement in 1873, the Springfield Model 1873. Better known as the Trapdoor Springfield, the single-shot 1873 Springfield rifle served as the primary service rifle used by the United States Army until the 1892 Springfield, chambered in the 3040 Krag cartridge, and better known as the Krag-Jorgensen rifle, came along near the end of the 19th century. Now, the Trapdoor Springfield rifle debuted with a new 45 caliber cartridge using a powder charge of 70 grains of black powder in a copper case. The Army used a couple different loads firing either 405 grain or 500 grain bullets for the cartridge. Those performance specifications are where the name of the cartridge comes from. Now, the standard naming convention in common use at that time consisted of the caliber of the cartridge followed by the standard load of powder in grains. Since the new cartridge was designed at the United States government-operated Springfield Armory and used either a 405 grain or a 500 grain 45 caliber bullet propelled by 70 grains of powder, the cartridge received the designation 4570-405 or 4570-500, depending on the exact load. Commercial publications and catalogs from that time also soon began referring to the cartridge as the 4570 government. This original black powder load pushed a cast lead bullet at a velocity of about 1,350 feet per second. Producing more than 1,600 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, this cartridge was one of the most powerful loads available at the time in a centerfire rifle, and the Army used that loading through the Indian Wars in the late 1800s. The U.S. Army continued to use various models of this rifle and cartridge in limited numbers through the Spanish-American War and the Philippine Insurrection in the late 1800s and the early 1900s until, like I said earlier, that Springfield 1892 Krag-Jorgensen rifle eventually supplemented and then finally replaced the Trapdoor Springfield. Now, in addition to the many variations of the Trapdoor Springfield rifle and carbine the Army used, several early Gatling gun models fired the 4570 government cartridge as well. Now, the 4570 also became pretty popular among sportsmen in the United States due to its excellent reputation earned while in use with the Army. Now, in response to significant demand for good rifles chambered in the cartridge, it didn't take long for the major manufacturers to begin building 4570 government rifles specifically marketed and designed for civilian hunters. Soon, hunters had access to a number of good lever-action and single-shot rifles and repeaters, like the Remington King, the Remington Rolling Block, the Sharps 1874 Buffalo Rifle, the Winchester Hotchkiss, the Winchester Model 1885 Highwall, and the Winchester Model 1886. Even when using the relatively simple solid lead bullets available at the time, the cartridge was pretty effective on game ranging from white-tailed deer and black bear all the way up to the larger, tougher, and sometimes more dangerous species like moose, grizzly bear, and bison. The use of modern smokeless powder has further improved the performance of the cartridge, and it remains a pretty popular and effective cartridge to this day. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about the 450 Bushmaster. That story begins almost a full century later with the .223 Remington and the AR-15. The U.S. military again began the search for a new rifle and cartridge just a few short years after replacing the M1 Garand and the 30-06 with the M14 battle rifle and the 7.62x51 NATO in the 1950s. The military eventually settled on the high-velocity 5.56x45mm cartridge and the M16 rifle, which was a military adoption of the civilian AR-15, which was itself a scaled-down and modified version of the AR-10. Derived from the .223 Remington, the original M193 ball load for the 5.56 cartridge fired a .224 caliber, 55 grain full metal jacket bullet at about 3,250 feet per second. Unfortunately, the rifle and cartridge suffered through some major teething problems during the Vietnam War, but modifications to the rifle and the propellant used in the cartridge eventually solved most of those problems. NATO conducted extensive testing after the Vietnam War in an effort to supplement the 7.62x51 NATO with another standardized rifle cartridge for members of the alliance. They ended up selecting the Belgian SS109 variant of the 5.56 cartridge. Known in the U.S. military as the M855, the new NATO ball load fired a 62 grain full metal jacket bullet at 3,025 feet per second. So it was a little bit heavier bullet, a little bit slower than the old M193 load. Often referred to as quote-unquote green tip ammo because of the green paint on the tip of the bullet, the U.S. Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marine Corps eventually adopted the M855 load along with the updated M16A2 rifle during the 1980s. The M855 bullet incorporated a steel penetrator which markedly improved the penetration capabilities of that load compared to the old 55 grain M193 load. By and large, those who used the M193 in combat considered the terminal performance of the bullet adequate. However, many soldiers and Marines who used the M16A2 in combat during the 1990s and early 2000s complained about the very poor stopping power of the M855 ball round though. Now, civilian interest in the AR-15 and the .223 Remington cartridge steadily grew during the second half of the 20th century, especially for varmint hunting and target shooting. However, many big game hunters had concerns similar to those shared by many in the military regarding the effectiveness of the .223 Remington cartridge on deer-sized game. Those issues led to the development of several larger caliber cartridges featuring heavier bullets designed to still function in AR-15 rifles. This included cartridges like the 300 Blackout, the 6.5 Grendel, the 6.8 Remington SPC, the 4.58 SOCOM, and the 50 Beowulf. Well, the 450 Bushmaster was yet another bigger bore AR cartridge resulting from those same concerns. Now, Colonel Jeff Cooper described a rifle he called the Thumper in some of his writings. Basically, he thought an ideal hunting firearm was a semi-automatic rifle, 44 caliber or larger, that was capable of taking large game out to 250 yards. The little .223 Remington obviously did not fill that need. However, Tim Legender of Lemag Firearms decided to build a hard-hitting 45 caliber cartridge designed for use in the AR platform that he developed using a cut-down and necked-up .284 Winchester case. He called the new cartridge the 45 Professional. Legender licensed the cartridge to Bushmaster, who in turn collaborated with Hornady in bringing the project to market. Hornady and Bushmaster made some slight modifications to the 45 Professional and released the new cartridge as the 450 Bushmaster in the early 2000s. Now, that new straight-walled cartridge functions in the AR-15 platform, and pushing a .452 caliber, 250 grain bullet at a muzzle velocity of about 2,200 feet per second, it does deliver the bone-crushing performance out of an easy-to-handle semi-auto rifle like Colonel Cooper originally envisioned. Now, interestingly, while the 450 Bushmaster is used all over the United States, it is one of the more popular rifle cartridges that meet the relatively strict definition of a straight-walled cartridge as required by hunting regulations in certain states. In particular, states like Iowa and Ohio require hunters to use a straight-walled cartridge during the modern firearm deer season. This also applies on public land in Indiana, as well as parts of southern Michigan. Now, those states have more restrictive regulations on what constitutes a legal cartridge to hunt with, ostensibly because they're more densely populated, and they want hunters to use handgun cartridges with a shorter effective range. So for this reason, lots of hunters use shotguns, handguns, muzzleloaders, and rifles chambered in straight-walled cartridges like the 450 Bushmaster, and even sometimes the 4570, as well as the newer 350 Legend in those states. Now, since the 450 Bushmaster offers significantly better ballistics than rifled shotgun slugs, and even many muzzle loaders and handguns, and since it is available in a number of reasonably priced deer rifles, the cartridge has really caught on in that part of the country. We'll talk more about this in a second. Okay, now let's talk about how these two cartridges compare in size. So first off, the 4570 Government is physically larger than the 450 Bushmaster. Both are straight-walled cartridges, but the 4570 has a longer overall length, longer case length, and a larger diameter case than the 450 Bushmaster. Specifically, the 4570 has an overall length of 2.55 inches in a 2.105-inch long case. The 450 Bushmaster has an overall length of 2.25 inches in a 1.7-inch long case. The 4570 has a case diameter of 0.504 inches, while the 450 Bushmaster has a slightly smaller 0.500-inch case diameter. That said, the 450 Bushmaster will easily fit into a standard AR-15 style rifle, while the longer 4570 will not. Furthermore, the 4570 is a rimmed case that is 0.608 inches in diameter at the rim, while the 450 Bushmaster uses a rebated rim that is 0.473 inches in diameter. So for all of those reasons, the 4570 has significantly more case capacity than the 450 Bushmaster. Bullet size and bullet weight are other important differences between these cartridges. The 450 Bushmaster uses .452 caliber bullets, while the 4570 uses slightly larger .458 caliber bullets. Now, most 450 Bushmaster ammo typically has bullet weights in the 158 to 300 grain range, and 250 and 260 grain bullets are the most popular. On the other hand, while it is possible to find 4570 ammo shooting bullets weighing as little as 250 grains in a factory load, and as heavy as 540 grains, maybe even heavier in some cases, most 4570 factory loads use 300 grain, 325 grain, 350 grain, or 405 grain bullets. Now, the 450 Bushmaster is also loaded to a higher SAMI maximum average pressure of 38,500 psi versus just 28,000 psi for the 4570. Now, these pressure figures can be a little misleading though. This is because the 450 Bushmaster was designed from the very beginning to use smokeless powder and function in an AR-15, while the 4570 was originally designed for black powder before being adopted to use smokeless powder. Now, the 4570 is also an older cartridge, and there's a wide range of rifles manufactured in that chambering. So for this reason, ammunition manufacturers will often manufacture ammunition in different power levels for use in different rifles. And then the same is also true for hand loading data. For instance, and this is the case with many reloading manuals, my Lyman 50th edition reloading manual has 3 different categories of 4570 hand loads. The first and the least powerful are those safe to use in a trapdoor Springfield, and they have maximum pressures in the 15,000 to 18,000 psi range. Next, we have those safe to use in 1886 Winchester and Marlin 1895 rifles, and they have a maximum pressure in the 22 to 28,000 psi range. And then finally, we have those that are safe to use in the Ruger No. 1 with maximum pressures in the 30 to 39,900 psi range. We'll cover this in more detail later, but just realize that the SAMI standards for the 4570 can be artificially low in some cases because of those older rifles, and then the same thing also applies to certain types of ammunition. Even so, I would say that in general, the 450 Bushmaster is still designed to operate at higher pressures than the 4570. Now, despite the differences in the external dimensions and pressure characteristics of these cartridges, their ballistic performance is closer than you might think. This is illustrated when you compare Hornady Black and Lever Revolution, Federal PowerShock, Winchester PowerPoint, and Remington Core-Lock factory ammo. Specifically, the 450 Bushmaster loads use a 250 grain FTX with a .210 BC, 260 grain PowerPoint with a .191 BC, and 300 grain PowerShock soft point bullets with a .225 BC. For the 4570, we have loads using a 325 grain FTX bullet with a .230 BC, 300 grain PowerPoint with a .283 BC, 300 grain PowerShock soft point with a .289 BC, and 405 grain Core-Lock bullets with a .281 BC. Now notice that while all the bullets used in this comparison aren't really that aerodynamic, at least compared to bullets used in many other cartridges, the various bullets used in those 4570 loads all have a higher BC than those used in comparable 450 Bushmaster loads. Now the Hornady ammunition options are higher velocity loadings for each cartridge. The PowerPoint loads are medium power loadings using lighter for caliber bullets in the 450 Bushmaster and heavier bullets in the 4570. The PowerShock loads are also medium power loadings that use the same weight bullet for each cartridge. And that Remington Core-Lock loading for the 4570 is a very low powered loading that mimics the original ballistics of the cartridge and is safe to use in a trapdoor Springfield. And I included that in there to show you the different power levels that you can find in factory ammo loadings. Now, there's quite a bit of overlap between the two cartridges in terms of energy and trajectory. The 450 Bushmaster handily outperforms the old trapdoor Springfield, say 4570 Core-Lock load, but it can't quite reach the performance of the higher octane 4570 Lever Revolution load. However, the 450 Bushmaster also has a small edge over the run-of-the-mill PowerShock and PowerPoint 4570 loads at closer range, since the 450 Bushmaster fires a lighter bullet at a faster velocity. Now those lighter 250 and 260 grain 450 Bushmaster loads also have a slightly flatter trajectory than the 300 grain 4570 loads out to 250 yards, but this is honestly a very small difference. Now, interestingly, the modern 4570 loads all have more retained kinetic energy out at 200 to 250 yards since they use a slightly more aerodynamic bullet. All things considered, it is pretty much a wash though, and both cartridges have very, very similar performance at the shorter ranges they are both most effective at. The 4570 does have a bit of an edge in terms of trajectory and retained energy with that Lever Revolution load, but that lower pressured 4570 load is outclassed by everything. But otherwise, I think it's safe to say that the two cartridges are otherwise almost identical in terms of performance, at least as far as trajectory and kinetic energy go. Now let's talk about wind deflection. Once again, we got quite a bit of overlap here, and both cartridges have very similar performance. The 4570 has a small edge here because it uses higher BC bullets, but there's still not a tremendous difference at these shorter ranges. Once again, the cartridges are most effective at. And really, neither one of them is that great in the wind, but if you're using these at shorter range, like I keep saying, where they're most effective, we're not talking about something that is really a big concern. Now let's talk about recoil though. And in this case, I'm comparing the recoil produced by hand loads that approximate the performance of the 250 grain 450 Bushmaster load, and we'll compare that to the 4570 load in both the lower pressure 405 grain load that mimics the old black powder loading and that higher pressure 325 grain Lever Revolution load. When you shoot them all from identical weight 7-pound rifles, the 450 Bushmaster is right in the middle. It has about 23% more recoil than the low pressure 4570, but the higher pressure 4570 load in turn has about 47% more recoil than that 450 Bushmaster load. So for reference, that 405 grain 4570 load and the 450 Bushmaster load have recoil more or less on par with cartridges like the 270 and the 30-06 in terms of rifles with a similar weight. So all things concerned, most hunters should be able to handle the recoil from the 450 Bushmaster without too much trouble. Now that higher powered 4570 load is definitely getting up there in terms of recoil, but it's still not terrible, and you can further mitigate that recoil with the use of a muzzle brake or even a bigger bore suppressor, like are becoming more common these days. I wouldn't say the 450 Bushmaster is a light recoiling cartridge, but it still has an advantage in this respect, and especially for hunters who don't tolerate recoil that well. So just keep that in mind and don't underestimate the impact that recoil has on the ability of a person to shoot accurately either. All right, what about accuracy? It's tough to pick a winner here. Both are capable of good accuracy, but neither one is really known for precision shooting. The 4570 is still used by many black powder silhouette shooters and cowboy action shooters, but that's about the extent of its usage for competitive shooting. On the other hand, the 450 Bushmaster isn't really used in competition shooting that much. Additionally, it's unusual to encounter rifles chambered in either cartridge that are exceptionally accurate. And as we'll cover here shortly, the 4570 is most commonly available in lever action rifles. And for a number of reasons, lever action rifles are generally not quite as accurate as bolt action rifles. This isn't usually that big of an issue though for most hunters, and a good lever action rifle is usually still more than accurate enough. Now that is also not limited to just the 4570. Like I said, the 450 Bushmaster, even though it is available in bolt action rifles more commonly than the 4570, once again, it's not often available in just like tack driving models. And interestingly, Christensen Arms specifically excludes the 450 Bushmaster from their 1 MOA accuracy guarantee that they provide with many of their rifles. So you probably won't be shooting sub-MOA with a rifle in either cartridge, but a rifle that shoots 2 or even 2.5 MOA is still plenty accurate for just about anything you'd be using a rifle in either cartridge for. Like I said, that's not to say these cartridges aren't capable of great accuracy at times or are limited to strictly short-range shots. Indeed, the 4570 was a long-range cartridge back when it first came on the scene. Buffalo hunters in the late 1800s used tang or ladder iron sights with vernier scales that allowed for very precise elevation adjustments. As long as he estimated the range correctly, a skilled marksman using a high-quality rifle and sight could accurately hit targets out past 1,000 yards with the 4570. That said, though, hitting a target at 1,000 yards is a far cry from taking a shot on an animal at that range. Due to these constraints, while the 4570 is popular among black powder silhouette shooters, few hunters these days use the cartridge at ranges past 200 yards, and the same is true to a certain extent for the 450 Bushmaster. That cartridge does have an advantage with a flatter trajectory and less recoil with certain loadings, both of which facilitate better shot placement. So it's possible the 450 Bushmaster may have a tiny edge in accuracy potential at typical hunting ranges, but I wouldn't say it's a big edge. Okay, next, there's a couple of other factors that are also worth considering. So first, the 4570 uses larger diameter bullets than the 450 Bushmaster. Specifically, the larger diameter .458 caliber bullets used in that cartridge have about 3% more frontal surface area than the .452 caliber bullets used by the 450 Bushmaster. All other things being equal, a bigger bullet will make a bigger hole, cause more tissue damage, and result in more blood loss. So this is a small advantage in favor of the 4570, especially on bigger game. It also has an edge over the 450 Bushmaster in bullet sectional density. Sectional density is a measure of the ratio of the diameter of a projectile to its mass. All other things being equal, a heavier bullet of a given caliber will be longer and have a higher sectional density and consequently penetrate deeper than projectiles with a lower mass and lower sectional density. So for example, 250 grain, 260 grain, and 300 grain 4.52 caliber bullets have sectional densities of 0.175, 0.177, and 0.211 respectively. Compare that to 250 grain, 300 grain, 325, 350, 405, and 500 grain .458 caliber bullets, which have sectional densities of 0.170, 0.204, .221, .238, .276, and .341 respectively. So while the lighter 4570 bullets are outclassed by the heaviest 450 Bushmaster bullets, the 4570 does have the edge with heavier bullets, and it also has the edge with the most common bullet weights for each cartridge, like 250 grain bullets for the 450 Bushmaster versus 300 grain bullets for the 4570. So to recap, the 4570 fires a larger diameter, often heavier, and usually more aerodynamic bullet at a slower velocity than the 450 Bushmaster. Trajectories and retained energy are similar, but the 4570 is better suited for use on really big game and in lever action rifles. Now let's talk about ammo, which is another important thing to keep in mind. Now both cartridges are fairly popular among hunters and shooters in the United States, but they're nowhere near as popular as cartridges like the 223 or 308. I'd say it's pretty close, but the 450 Bushmaster is probably the more commonly used of the two, but the 4570 is by no means rare, and it also has a pretty dedicated base of support. So they're both in pretty common use, and ammo is usually not too hard to find. Availability does probably vary regionally though. For instance, it's likely that people use the 4570 more up in places like Alaska, where its hard-hitting characteristics are useful in creatures like moose and brown bear. Likewise, the 450 Bushmaster is more popular in the Midwest. In general, 450 Bushmaster ammo is often a little cheaper than 4570 ammo though, and this is especially true with cheap full metal jacket ammo for use at the range, which is available in 450 Bushmaster, but usually not in 4570. Now there are some other important differences in the types of ammo available for each cartridge though. So first, the 4570 is available with heavier and more solidly constructed rifle bullets, while the 450 Bushmaster uses smaller diameter, lighter, and less tough pistol bullets. This means that in general, 4570 ammo choices are better suited to larger and or tougher game than is the case with the 450 Bushmaster. There is some overlap here though. For instance, many ammo choices for both work great on deer, and the Barnes Vortex line is an example of an ammo option loaded with tougher bullets, the TSX in this case, that is available as a factory load for both cartridges. Like I said though, that is a general trend for both cartridges at this instant. And the big ammo manufacturers like Barnes, Buffalo Bore, Federal, Hornady, Remington, and Winchester all produce a pretty good selection of ammo for both cartridges. And during normal times, it's usually easy to find ammo for both, and most guns and sporting goods stores will have 450 Bushmaster and 4570 ammo in stock. And like I said, both cartridges are offered some of the really popular hunting ammo lines: Barnes Vortex, Federal Power Shock, Federal Fusion, Hornady Subsonic, Remington Core Lock, and Winchester Super X, just to name a few. Now there are some isolated cases where one cartridge is available in a certain ammo line but the other isn't, and this reflects both the performance characteristics and the common uses of each cartridge. For instance, since 4570 is more common in lever action rifles with tubular magazines, most loads feature a round nose or a flat-tipped bullet. This is because bullets are stacked one in front of the other, and recoil could potentially cause a bullet with a pointed tip to detonate the primer of the cartridge in front of it. Now those round or flat nose bullets have an even lower than normal ballistic coefficient and poor downrange performance. Now the upside is those flat nose bullets do tend to perform really well on game and deliver excellent terminal performance. Designers at Hornady attempted to remedy this problem with those low BC bullets with their Lever Revolution line of ammo, like I mentioned earlier. Now they make that ammunition in cartridges that are popular in lever guns, like 30-30, 35 Remington, and 45-70. But not 450 Bushmaster. Now this ammo is loaded with bullets that have a pointed, flexible polymer tip. It doesn't bring those cartridges up to anywhere close to the level of a flat shooting round like the 7mm Remington Magnum or the 300 Win Mag, but Lever Revolution ammo does use more aerodynamic bullets and generally has a higher velocity than typical ammunition for those cartridges. And so this ammunition does have a little bit flatter trajectory, slightly increased effective range, and it does retain more energy at typical hunting ranges. And those polymer tips also help initiate expansion on impact, and they also tend to deliver devastating terminal performance on all manner of game. Now the situation is different with the 450 Bushmaster though. Since it's more common in bolt-action rifles and in ARs, most 450 Bushmaster loads use pointed bullets. In that same vein, Hornady offers the cartridge in their black line of ammunition, which is designed for use in modern sporting rifles. This ammo is intended to deliver reliable performance with different barrel lengths, with different gas systems, with piston-driven rifles, and in suppressed as well as unsuppressed rifles. Those scenarios all present challenges for designers that are different from those presented by bolt-action or lever-action rifles, which is why Hornady black ammo is available in cartridges like 223, 556, 65 Grendel, 300 Blackout, and 450 Bushmaster, but not 4570. All right, so with all that said, during the big ammo shortage that's still going on as I record this, the difference between the two cartridges has become pretty scrambled in terms of availability. And at least where I live and shop, right now anyway, 450 Bushmaster ammo is usually easier to find than ammo for the 4570. The situation is usually better online, and the bigger retailers have often had a pretty good selection of quality factory ammo for both as well. But in general, 450 Bushmaster ammo has still been easier to find even online. And really, the 450 Bushmaster has actually been, at least in the last year or so, one of the easier centerfire rifle cartridges to find just in general, where I shop and that sort of thing. Okay, now let's talk about rifles. There's also a pretty good selection of hunting rifles in both 450 Bushmaster and 4570, though once again, there's a big split in the type of rifles available for each. And this is another major difference between these two cartridges. Since it is a rimmed cartridge, the 4570 is most commonly, though not exclusively, chambered in single shot and lever action firearms, with the notable exception of the Browning BLR. In addition to the various rifles and carbines originally chambered in 4570 from the late 1800s that are still floating around out there, there are several different firearms in current production chambered in that cartridge as well. So first up, we have the Marlin 1895 lever action, which is the bigger brother to the Marlin 336. That is likely the single most popular rifle manufactured in 4570. Those Marlin rifles are available in several configurations with different barrel and magazine lengths and styles, as well as various finishes. In particular, the Marlin 1895G guide gun is one of the most iconic 4570 rifles in current production, and it is a big favorite among hunting guides in places like Alaska who need a fast-pointing and hard-hitting rifle in case they must deal with an angry moose or brown or grizzly bear at close range. In addition to Marlin lever actions, the various Henry 4570 rifles are also very nice, and they're also growing in popularity. And Winchester continues to manufacture the legendary lever action 1886 and 4570 as well. Now, though it is no longer in current production, the Ruger No. 1 single shot was manufactured in 4570 for a time, and those rifles can be found occasionally on the secondary market. Ruger has produced that rifle in darn near every centerfire cartridge at one point or another over the years, but interestingly, it has not produced it in 450 Bushmaster, at least not yet anyway. Now finally, a number of Siamese Mauser bolt-action rifles were converted to 4570 over the years, so they are also an option for someone who wants a bolt-action 4570. Now on the other hand, the 450 Bushmaster is much more common in bolt-action and semi-automatic rifles than the 4570. Bushmaster was the first gun manufacturer to produce firearms in 450 Bushmaster, and that cartridge is still available in various semi-automatic rifles produced by that company. In addition to Bushmaster, Ruger also produces their semi-automatic AR-556 in 450 Bushmaster. CVA produces their single-shot Hunter and Scout rifles in the cartridge, and the same goes for Savage, Howa, and Ruger with their bolt-action 110, Mini, American Ranch, and Gunsight Scout rifles. Heck, you can even get a Christensen Arms Mesa or Ridgeline, or a Bergara B14 in 450 Bushmaster as well. Okay. So we've talked about the history of these cartridges, their size differences, their differences in ballistic performance, recoil, accuracy, and ammo and rifle availability, and the differences between them in each way. So which cartridge is right for you? Do you hunt medium-sized game like white-tailed deer, feral hogs, or black bear at ranges within 200 yards? Both cartridges are outstanding deer hunting cartridges, and they'll work great on deer-sized game with good shot placement. Don't let anybody try and tell you the 450 Bushmaster or the 4570 is overkill on deer. Lots of deer hunters use those cartridges each year, and there's not a darn thing wrong with using either one on deer size game. And I certainly have. But if we're being honest, that's really more gun than you need for that sort of work. And both cartridges will be rougher on your shoulder and probably your wallet than many other deer hunting cartridges. But hey, if that's your thing, go ahead and do it. Go with the 450 Bushmaster if you want to hunt with a bolt-action rifle, a modern sporting rifle, or if you are required to use a straight-wall cartridge. Likewise, go with the 4570 if you want to hunt with a lever-action rifle, or if you just want to use a cartridge with a little more history. Are you looking for the cartridge better suited for a longer range hunting, for game like mule deer, pronghorn, and open country where you might need to take a shot at several hundred yards? Both have a much longer effective range than a shotgun with slugs, or pistol cartridges like the 45 Colt and 44 Magnum when fired from a carbine, or a pistol anyway. Neither the 450 Bushmaster nor the 4570 is really a good choice for hunting situations where you might need to take a shot at ranges over 200 yards. Of the two, the 4570 does have a flatter trajectory and a little bit longer effective range when using modern ammunition like Hornady's Lever Revolution line. You might be able to make a shot on a deer out to maybe 300 yards or so under ideal conditions with the 4570, but I think that is pushing it if we're honest. Something like the 7mm Rim Mag, the 30-06, or even the 6.5 Creedmoor is a much better choice for that sort of hunting at a little bit longer ranges. Do you want a hunting cartridge that is well suited for use on bigger game, like bison, moose, or elk hunting? The 450 Bushmaster will certainly get the job done on those bigger creatures with good shot placement and under ideal conditions. That said, I think the 4570 is a much better choice for those types of hunts because it's available in factory loads, better suited for those hunts with tougher and heavier bullets. Now, additionally, remember what I said earlier, ammunition suitable for that sort of hunting is really limited for the 450 Bushmaster, right? Like I told you earlier, that cartridge uses slightly modified pistol bullets, and they aren't really ideal for deep penetration on big game, especially compared to the options for the 4570. Regardless of the cartridge you choose, realize that your effective range is fairly limited with these cartridges, especially on really large game. They're both capable of cleanly and ethically taking bigger game, but you should only take shots within maybe 150 yards or so, and 100 yards and closer is even better. Are you specifically hunting brown or grizzly bear? What if you hunt in Alaska or Canada and need a heavy-hitting cartridge just in case you find yourself on the wrong end of a big bear attack? Once again, I think the 4570 is the best choice here, and it is one of the best bear defense cartridges available. After all, there's a reason why the Marlin Guide Gun is so popular among hunters and outfitters up in Alaska. There are few other rifles I would rather have in my hands if I had to deal with a charging brown bear. All right, what if you need a really heavy-hitting cartridge, ideally suited for hunting thick-skinned, dangerous game like Cape buffalo or water buffalo? While both may technically be big bores in the broadest sense of the word, I strongly recommend against using both cartridges for hunting thick-skinned, dangerous game. Not everybody agrees with me on this, and there are definitely a few hunters who have successfully taken water buffalo with the 4570. I think the 4570 is a great cartridge, but there are good reasons not to hunt Cape buffalo with it. And I've written a comprehensive article explaining why I think that's the case. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check that article out and learn the details there. Are you sensitive to recoil and need a lower recoiling cartridge? Neither is really a light recoiler. The 450 Bushmaster does have an edge here when compared to typical 4570 loads, but remember from earlier, the various really low pressure 4570 loads that are safe to use in the trapdoor Springfield also have surprisingly low recoil as well. Now realize that even those really light power 4570 loads in the 450 Bushmaster in general might still be too much for extremely recoil sensitive shooters to handle. Now the 350 Legend is an option for hunters who need a straight wall cartridge with really mild recoil, and the 3030 is a good alternative for those who want to hunt with a lever gun. Do you just like lever action rifles in general? Well, the choice here is easy. Get a 4570 if you want a lever action rifle. And if you want a bolt action rifle or a modern sporting rifle, get a 450 Bushmaster. What if you want a heavy hitting truck gun of some sort? In this case, I think the 450 Bushmaster is the better choice. There's nothing wrong with using something like a Marlin 1895 as a truck gun, but in my mind, a rifle like the Ruger American Ranch and 450 Bushmaster is a really compact rifle that is also inexpensive and very utilitarian. To me, that's the sort of rifle that is ideal for carrying around in my truck or side by side in the event I run across something like a feral hog that I want to shoot. Now, as I've stated before, they're both really solid rifle cartridges. Now, while there is a lot of overlap in their performance and ideal uses, they are not identical. And in some areas, the difference between the 450 Bushmaster and the 4570 can be pretty big, and there are certain personal preferences and certain hunting situations where one is definitely a better choice than the other. So carefully evaluate your needs as a hunter based on the circumstances you foresee using the cartridge in. Get a good hunting rifle chambered in the cartridge you select. Learn to shoot it well, use quality bullets, and it should serve you well afield. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click that red subscribe button below to make sure you don't miss out on any of my new videos on hunting gear reviews, cartridge comparisons, and more. For more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they're best suited for, click the link in the description below or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. Which one do you prefer? The 450 Bushmaster or the 4570? What game have you successfully taken with them, and what ammo did you use to do that? Let me know by leaving a comment on this video right now. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.